Let's welcome Nabilah onto the show. Nabilah Islam, she is a former Georgian congressional candidate and currently a political activist. Do we have her? Here she is. Hi, Nabilah. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining us. Emma is joining us in just a second. I think the last time we talked, you were running for office.
I was running for office, yes, and I think we talked another time during the I think the day of the Senate runoff election in Georgia as well.
Right. Okay. So, all right. So let's talk about.
Hello.
There's
I guess
there's Emma. She's here now.
I had to eat cashews and
She had to eat
take my
cashews,
break.
and then we can't eat nuts during the show because then it all gets stuck in the throats and people have problems.
Yeah.
So, all right, so Nabil, ignore that. Give us a sense of what's happening in Georgia right now, because it has become the sort of the epicenter. Now, Georgia is not the only state in the country that's passing these sort of really restrictive voting laws, but it is becoming a major pivot point for a bunch of different things that are happening, from McConnell on one hand, attacking corporations that are trying to, I guess, show that they're on the right side of this argument, to, the both siderism that we're seeing, data journalists in the New York Times saying it doesn't really make a difference. I mean, just give us a sense of what's happening from a perspective from Georgia.
Yes, so our voting rights are under attack, and this new law absolutely will affect voter turnout and how it does make it harder for people to vote, most definitely. It was built on a lie of voter fraud by Donald Trump. So you have, about 60%, over 60% of Republican voters still think that the election was rigged in the presidential. And so they are angry at these local Republican politicians for not doing enough to prevent Joe Biden from winning the state of Georgia. And again, we saw what happened in the Senate runoff. They come out and vote because they were pissed off. So now what Republicans did was they passed some red meat legislation to appease a bunch of these really far-right voters that are going to come out in these primaries that are coming up next year, to make them feel better. Like, look, guys, we passed some type of legislation. What it does is it makes it harder for Black and brown and working people to be able to vote. It now includes a voter ID requirement for absentee voting. Keep in mind, 1.3 million Georgians voted during the general election, and the mail-in voting was about 65% for Joe Biden. So it's skewed more for Democrats. They're making it harder to be able to submit your application. Now outside groups can't send you an application anymore. Your county can't send you an application. You have to go online and ask for one. They are also making it so that you can't give out food and water to voters. You can't be within 25 feet of giving assistance to voters. Georgia was notorious for its long lines of up to 9 hours in some locations. And then the most egregious, I would say, is the state election takeover. So basically, in Georgia, we have all these county board electors that oversee the election process locally. And for example, I live in Gwinnett County, and we do, two people from the Gwinnett Democratic Party appoint. The Gwinnett Democratic Party appoints two people, and the Republicans appoint two people, and we have one independent person. So it's kind of a fair, balanced approach. Now Republicans can say, like, oh, well, your county isn't performing well. We're going to install whoever we want from the Republican legislature. So basically, a Republican takeover of county elections. And we can deem how many polling locations that you're allowed to have. If there's any discrepancies with ballots, we can choose which ones we want to move forth and which ones we want to throw away. And so it's an absolute, it's disgusting. And Republicans are the ones that are always touting, we need local control, less government. And they're the ones that are just like being super greedy here and taking over our election system. So
that last provision seems to me to be the real gist of this bill. Like everything else in there, I think is problematic in one way or another. But at the end of the day, if they basically can step in and say, like, okay, forget all that.
Yeah.
I know you paid attention to those things, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't. I mean, it's probably, but to take over, sort of, it's almost like the same thing as the emergency manager bill that ended up, poisoning all these children in Flint. It is basically just sort of this takeover, and then they can do just about anything, and that seems like, I mean, your average voter just is not terribly savvy about the fact that, like, hey, wait a second. The reason why it's hard for me to vote, or it's a pain in the ass for me to go find my polling places, is because of this bill that got passed 2 years ago. That just doesn't happen, right? I mean, that's the problem with this.
Oh, definitely. Like, it's a definite partisan power grab. And like, I didn't even know how bad it was until after my congressional election. My county party hired me to be like a strategist for them to help them communicate with low propensity voters and help with voter turnout during the general election. And I learned that the reason we only had 9 polling locations is because early voting locations, in comparison to other counties that had like a fourth of our population who had 20 of them, is because our county board, our county commission decided not to fund the decision that the county board made to expand voting locations. It's just, there's so many layers to this. Also, our Secretary of State, because in Gwinnett County, federally, we have to include Spanish and English on our absentee ballots. There was a delay in it. And so folks weren't able to get their ballots in time and couldn't vote in person. We had people fly in to go vote. And if you can take that over and like install whoever you want, you can change the rules. And something else that I'll even add was during the Senate runoff election, when they were counting votes in Gwinnett County, there were people that did not vote for Donald Trump, but wrote in Pence, okay? And they were trying to say that that was a vote for Trump and trying to push that through. And if it wasn't for the folks on our side that we had appointed that oversaw that process, we might not have known that was happening. We were able to stop it with election lawyers. I mean, it's death by 1,000 cuts.
Can one of the cuts too, I feel like, can you expand on how this law targets the souls to the polls process? Because, from my understanding, I have notes on this from yesterday. Let me turn to that. But how essentially they make it a lot harder to vote on the weekends, which was a huge boon for Black voters, where churches would go and vote. And now early voting has to be done within work hours during the weekday, according to this bill. Is that correct?
So during the Georgia, when they were putting this law together a month ago, they were trying to get rid of Sunday voting. So if you were trying to figure out if their intentions were malicious, yes, they were. They were trying to suppress Black voters from voting because souls to polls, especially in Georgia, is a huge thing. And what they ended up doing was they required an extra Saturday of voting and under state law, but they're not requiring Sunday voting. So if you're a county, you can decide whether or not you want to have Sunday voting. Also, they did make it so that, you can only vote between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. And it's up to a county if they want to let you vote, beyond that. But people get off jobs at 5 p.m. And a lot of these folks that are in working class jobs, they don't get off of work until 3 or 5, and with traffic, like when are they going to go vote? And so, yeah, it definitely has a direct impact on our Black and brown communities.
One of the arguments that we're hearing from people is, well, okay, so you won Georgia anyways. Like the idea that the data shows that often when there are restrictive voting measures, this ends up bringing out more voters because, the argument goes that like people become offended and more enthused to vote. But isn't it the case from your perspective? I mean, obviously you were involved in a big voter turnout drive, particularly for that senatorial campaign, that what happens is there's just more resources that are dedicated toward bringing out the vote. And if the playing field was leveled, if everyone had more access to voting, those resources would be deployed in other places or in other aspects, right? I mean, is that not the case?
So I would say more resources, always good, right? And you can always touch as many voters multiple times to make sure that they're voting. We should have these resources despite whether or not it is harder to vote. But I will say that when we were running our voter program during the Senate runoff targeting low propensity voters, a lot of these folks didn't know how to vote, or it said that it was too hard for them to vote. It was they make the if you make it harder, if you make it more complicated for people to understand how to get an absentee ballot, to stand in line. I mean, these lines are 5-6 hours long. People are not going to do it. And so we fundamentally just need to make it easier for people to exercise their constitutional right to vote.
But I mean, is that argument that these things can be overcome? It discounts the idea that means that more resources have to be dedicated towards just the basic idea of opening access as opposed to reaching even more voters.
Right. No, it does. It's we shouldn't have to spend millions of dollars trying to jump through these loopholes in order to tell people how they should be able to vote. I mean, that is ridiculous. It's unfortunate that not just in Georgia, but across the country, they're trying to pass all these laws because they lost in the presidential election and they're trying to make their voters feel better.